Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for connecting in with us from all of the various locations where you're at. It's my privilege to be able to introduce our speaker for this session, Darren Spyksma. Darren serves as a Director of Learning at the Society of Christian Schools, British Columbia, or SCSBC. He is the father of 2 current university students, and just recently, Darren had the opportunity to be back in the classroom teaching grade 7 at Abbotsford Christian School. So let's welcome Darren as he talks about his session on systemic Sabbath keeping, creating a culture of trust.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that I am coming from the traditional territory of the Kwantlen Nation, and I'm just happy to be able to live and play on this land, and I'm grateful to the Kwantlen people for stewarding it well and continuing to steward it well. Today we're here to talk about a commandment, a challenge, and really our hope is that we consider this idea of Sabbath as something that we can live at both personally but also systemically as schools. This has been an area of ongoing work for me personally, but in this time of pandemic, I believe now is the time to step boldly into a culture of Sabbath, and really what that means is a culture of trust. So everyone has heard the word Sabbath and knows Sabbath, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the roots of Sabbath and where we need to focus our ideas of Sabbath as we look at doing this systemically. I think it's important to realize that after 6 days, God rested. He built a rhythm into creation. And as image bearers, who are also called to create, we are also invited into Sabbath and rest. And Sabbath, it says in Scripture, is blessed, which is the root Jewish word, the Hebrew word barak, which is blessing. And blessed in this context, in the creation story, is a life-giving ability to procreate, to make more life, and rest refills us to do that. Sabbath is an entire day in the week set aside to be holy. Set aside and dedicated to the Lord. It comes from a Hebrew word, manua, and it's a special kind of rest, one that can actually be cultivated. And it's something that actually takes effort. It's something you create, or you can create as an image bearer. It's about cultivation of an environment and an atmosphere. It's about creating space to enjoy life, to enjoy work, and to enjoy God. Many of us who grew up in Christian households heard a lot about Sabbath and Sunday, and we have different traditions around that. But I think it's important to, before we get into specifics about how, is to establish our why. Why talk about Sabbath? Why is Sabbath so important? I think it's important to acknowledge that Sabbath is more than just a nap. It's more than just rest. We're talking about a higher level of spiritual living that rejects the amassing of wealth or information. But it's that idea that it gives us an opportunity each week to pursue sacred moments. Heschel reminds us, and we can get sucked into the vortex of the hamster wheel, but Heschel reminds us that 6 days we get to dominate the world or try to dominate the world. Some people won't like that language in our present climate culture, but that is this idea that we are called to cultivate and work. You know, Heschel uses the word dominate. But what I love about this is his definition of Sabbath, that it's on that Sabbath day that the focus is self and our connecting to God. Sabbath represents a few things. I think it's important that we understand that Sabbath is a step away from the competing stories of the world. That it's about stepping into our image bearing as we have a creator God who is in the business of world making, and we do that all week long, especially in Christian education, a vocation that is so important to the common good and to what we hope for society as we work towards the new creation. And in order to be able to have the energy and the passion and the drive that we have been created to have, we need to step back and delight in what God's doing. And it takes practice and it takes discipline to do it. It is the antithesis to consumerism, the reality that so much of the competing stories of individualism, consumerism, and narcissism are thieves. They're bandits. They take more than they give. And the irony of all those is that once you get another like, you only want 10 more likes. Once you get another sweater, you only want 10 more sweaters. And Sabbath is a rhythm that takes you out of that cycle. It's a line in the sand. It's the day where we say, actually, no more stuff, no more work, no more time. We are just going to rest in who we are as image bearers. So in the Hebrew tradition, there are a few elements of Sabbath that are worth mentioning as we think about how do we do this as a school, how do we do Sabbath as a classroom, and how do we do Sabbath as individuals. The first is the Hebrew word Shabbat, and where the word Sabbath comes from. It's this time for renewal and rediscovery. It's this time to die to your selfish desires and to focus on God and God's pleasure. It's also important to establish that there is a set time that you can anticipate. And as you get used to religious formation of Sabbath, it's 24 hours of disconnected time from life so you can focus on family, focus on God, and focus on worship. It's around celebration and around the table, having a meal together, inviting people to be part of your Sabbath story. And really it's about rest and worship. It's about being renewed in order to do the good work that we get to do the other 6 days of each week. So that's the foundation for Sabbath and why Sabbath, why it's important. Those that have practiced Sabbath in this form know how challenging it has become in this day and age. And we want to talk for the rest of our time and get ideas from the group about 3 areas where I believe we can step towards Sabbath ourselves as school leaders, as classroom leaders, and as individuals in order to create a space where Sabbath is expected out of our communities. Like I said, it will take practice, it will take discipline, but once achieved, it breathes new life into your week. So let's start with systemic Sabbath keeping and this idea that it starts from the top. Every one of us, I'm assuming, I'm guilty of both receiving and sending, will get an email from someone higher up in the responsibility hierarchy at a school on a Saturday afternoon or even on a Sunday afternoon. And we have developed this pattern where we're expected to respond. And sometimes I've had it where I'll get an email on a Saturday evening, and then if I don't respond fast enough, I get a follow-up text to let me know that there's an email. And we accept some of those patterns like that's how life is right now. And I would like to suggest that as a school institution, we can live a different story around Sabbath and around expectations at Sabbath, but that for it to really be flourishing and fulfilling at a school level, it needs to come from the school leadership. The email is one of those evil tools when it comes to Sabbath. As school leaders, as teachers who are emailing parents or students, we need to be conscious about when we're sending emails. We have the technology that allows us to program when emails are sent. I would like to suggest that as school leaders or as teachers who are sending messages to students or parents, that no message gets sent, preferably Friday at dinner, but if there needs to be some early weekend email, that by noon on Saturday, emails are done and the rest of the emails come out on Monday. Even something as simple as when emails are sent has a cultural and a formational impact on our staff and on our students. It's also important that if we're going to prioritize the commandment, and it is a commandment from God, to live into Sabbath, we need to be clear about why, we need to be clear about who, we need to be clear about what that looks like for us as a school, and then we need to have a good enough collaborative culture that when someone steps out of the Sabbath structure that we've created as a community, that there are other people that can come beside them and ask them why and check to make sure they're okay. And systemically, one of the most captivating ways to embrace Sabbath is collaborative planning. And I'm actually talking about real collaborative planning, where the work you do in your classroom is directly connected to what's happening outside of your classroom with your other teaching partners, with other people in your division, other people teaching your subject, so that you plan together, and even how you deliver the learning experiences is co-planned and co-created. Because what that means is you can go into the weekend and you actually can't change your plan. Because if you did, that's going to impact other people. And it becomes this subtle accountability that allows weekends to be what weekends need to be, and Sabbath what Sabbath needs to be. Collaborative planning not only embraces the rest side of Sabbath, but it also is a reminder that it's not about us. That we can work in community, support each other in community, and then step back and realize that the world won't come crashing down if we don't work on Sundays or Saturday afternoons or whenever you do your break during the week. And it's this modeling, it's this formation that comes when we realize that what happens in the classroom is a communal enterprise, that we can actually embrace Sabbath well. And I know everyone talks, yes, collaboration, we all love collaboration, but we also all love to shut the door and just do our own thing. And I think it's important to establish that we are created to be in community. We are created to be learning communities, and we have that language in our schools. And yet, as educators, we often reject the extra work and time needed during collaborative time. We just want to do our own thing. But a collaborative structure at a systemic level, where teachers are co-creating a week's worth of plans and then heading into the weekend without that, allows them to actually take the break I'm suggesting needs to be taken for us to have the energy and the passion we need to keep going in what is one of the most demanding jobs on the planet, in my mind. So when we say collaborative planning, we're talking about co-creation of learning design across a subject area, across a grade level, which allows us to go into the weekend. I know I'm belaboring this, but it allows us to go into the weekend with the plans made, and then we can't go back and change it. So we actually have created a structure that allows us to rest. Schools have done that very effectively with collaborative late starts early dismissals that are focused on collaboration, not on staff meetings, not on other things, but focused on collaboration. It's also important to realize that I can come to you with ideas, but each context is going to be a little different. So what I'd love for you to do is just add into the chat at this stage, or if you have further questions, what are systems of Sabbath that you have already created at your school, or that you can imagine creating at your school? And let's just crowdsource a bunch of ideas of how some of these ideas I've just shared at a system level can be part of schools. And hopefully we'll be able to inspire each other to even more ideas around Sabbath system-wide. So let's take a few minutes now to add ideas to the Q&A. It'll be my first time. I've got the app open here, and I encourage you to add questions and ideas around what are systems that we can put in place or have put in place that will support Sabbath at our school. So thank you very much. I'm just quickly scrolling through. I love some of those ideas. Chris, thank you. We actually need to learn how to do this. And I think that's, and I'm not even sure I know how to snooze emails. So Chris, I'm going to have to pop by and get you to teach me that one. Tom, thank you for the avoiding the weekend email train. Sounds easier than it is, I realize. And I've been guilty of that. Derek, I love this. We need to have a email reading session to catch up. That does make me think we need to think twice before we actually send an email to know whether it's actually worth sending or if there's a better way to communicate this. But I do, that one made me smile. Yes, Sean, you mentioned, and we'll get there as far as classroom Sabbath, this idea that nothing should be due on Mondays. I'm a firm believer in that. Oh, yes. The biggest struggle with Sabbath keeping is keeping up with marking. Any suggestions for this? That is a struggle for everyone, I would imagine. I do have some ideas we'll touch on, but I'd love for us to come back to that one as we go. And also, I think even looking at parent newsletters, and Melissa, yes, I was struggling a little bit with some tech here, but I am obviously getting these now. I think seems like a lot of people, yes, Derek, a lot of people are ready for the weekend to start, so leaving on Friday is common, but then we all work through the weekend. I think it's possible that we can imagine different structures that actually make some of that, maybe not on Friday afternoon, but maybe as a team you pick Thursday afternoon to be that evening where someone's baking cinnamon buns, or you're talking to the foods teacher to make sure that you've got some extra treats, and you spend a significant amount of time as part of your weekly schedule to prepare for Sabbath. Because there is some rules and some ideas around Sabbath keeping for classrooms as well. And some of the ideas are already in the chat. But I think we have to realize that Sabbath actually extends out of our mission. So we need to look at how does Sabbath speak to our mission, because when we're communicating to parents who might be alarmed about some of the changes, we need to be able to extend back to our mission and what our goal for our school is, what our vision is for our graduates. And I would hope that a vision for graduates includes the ability to pursue and engage in Sabbath. We also have responsibilities to parents. I have had and been guilty of making, the irony for me as both a parent and an educator is I've both done this to families and had it done to me, where we get an assignment that takes up the family's entire weekend. Because as a teacher, I didn't understand what the consequences of my assignment might be. We have a responsibility to our families to invite them into a Sabbath story, a better story. And as you might change things about your school to focus on Sabbath, or your classroom, when parents are asking, we want to communicate what we're trying to do and why it's so important to us as a class that students have time to rest and rediscover play and to enjoy family and time together. We obviously can't control home environments, but we can invite people into a way of being and trust that the Holy Spirit's working in that space. But practically, you need to be thinking about, as a classroom teacher, when do you communicate to parents? If it's Monday morning first thing, there's a pretty good chance you're working on the weekend. The job is demanding. We get great breaks. And you can't have your evenings and your weekends. And I think you need to decide for yourself, where are you going to focus your work time in order to ensure that there's time. And by Sabbath, we're talking 24 hours disconnected, which means on a weekend that still leaves you 24 hours to do other things, and some of that might include work. But I think it's important to say, yes, I'm going to spend our system in our house when my children were younger. My wife knew that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, from bedtime till about 9:30 or so, I was going to be working. And we created a system that worked for us through that time. But I also told my 7th graders that if they emailed me or at that time phoned my house between 4:30 and 7:30, it was small town northern British Columbia. So phoning the house actually did happen. We lived close to the school and people would forget things and give us a call. I said it was an automatic fail. And of course it was in jest, but it showed to the kids that I prioritized that family time. And that was part of a daily Sabbath ritual for us. From 4:30 to bedtime was family time, and I protected that time. I think it's important that we eliminate Monday due dates and weekend due dates. We see this as, students want more time. They'll always want more time. But by putting a weekend due date that is due before, after Sunday or during Sunday or at the end of the weekend, we're actually fighting a formational battle that we probably can't win. And I would like to suggest that maybe, and this gets to a little bit of the questions around marking, for your own possibility, what if we didn't actually have assignments due on Friday? And that you committed your Thursday night as one of your work evenings to get as much of the marking done as you can. And I think if we all set aside 2 hours after school on Thursday and 2 hours in the evening on Thursday to do our marking that we haven't got done yet, we'd be pretty close to staying on top of our marking if we had that discipline, and that discipline to prepare for Sabbath in that way. But I would also argue not everything that gets handed in needs to be marked, which is another side of this conversation as we go. And then I would invite the story of your classroom to be a story that talks about Sabbath and the importance of rest. And what does it look like to invite students on Friday morning? What are you going to do this week? What do you hope to do this week that will help you rest and celebrate what God's given you? And then Monday or both, what did you do this weekend that helped you? And even in those moments where students are saying, actually, I didn't do anything, that's okay. Life is like that. We all have that. I'm heading into a weekend this weekend that is like that, where I know it will be virtually impossible for me to carve out the 24 hours. But I will still work at carving out 12 or 18 because I'm committed to uninterrupted rest time. So as a classroom, what does it look like to invite kids into a daily ritual around break, gratitude? Again, I love the opening circle as a moment of gratitude to start our day. But what does it also look like, that weekly invitation to keep work out of Sundays and out of the weekends? And then also monthly, what does it look like to introduce this idea that we're going to ensure that we are not going to have things due from Wednesday to Sunday of this week because we want you to spend time learning new games with your family or introducing your family to this or something that's going to prompt deeper reflection if they're old enough around a spiritual practice or around time with family or time in creation that they come back and report, and you use that time to actually improve literacy and numeracy in the week following and integrate that Sabbath time with further learning later in the week. And when you're communicating that to your parents and why you're doing it, that's homework I can get excited about as a parent. Where we're engaged in activities with our kids because we're learning about Sabbath, we're learning about different aspects of being together as a family so that kids have something to report back. And we want to use family in the broadest sense as possible. We want to use family in the sense of grandparents, in the sense of family that I grew up with plenty of aunties and uncles who weren't actually biologically my auntie and uncle. And people in our lives that can help us and help nurture us as we go. Because often the feedback I get is like, but Darren, not all families will be able to do that. And I understand that. But this is an invitation into Sabbath. God doesn't actually force us to take Sabbath rest, but he invites us each week as part of his created order. It's important to teach students and to remind ourselves that in order to hear God, you actually have to be quiet. And Sabbath provides an opportunity for us to nurture that and encourage students and to teach students that message. And in this day and age, this connected world, that is a very challenging thing. Again, I'd be encouraged to hear your ideas, and I want to just grab my phone and take a look. But what about, rather than school focus, let's talk classroom focused. What are things you've done already that you're excited about that would help with Sabbath rest and break? And what are ideas that you've maybe thought of now as you've seen the comments in the chat or you have heard something I've said that's tweaked your interest? And then from there, we'll move into our final section, which is talking about personal Sabbath and how, as teachers, when we are bombarded with so much that we have to do, we have to think about, we need to keep, what does it look like to take an act of radical dependence in our personal lives and create that sort of being of trust in our Creator as we head into each weekend. So I'm just going to review some of the chat here. And yes, if you have ideas of what you've done to help promote Sabbath in your classroom, please share those with the others here. Oh, Elise, I love that idea. A good idea would be to have one specific school day each week where the whole school is offline and having I love that. Oh, yes, Kim. That's why I don't have a smartwatch. Because I can't imagine, I can't imagine. And I watch people who I'm having a conversation with that are suddenly gone because their wrist is vibrating. So thank you for that. Oh, I like Cheryl. Love that. Staff bulletins sent out on Friday rather than Sunday. Yes, Melissa, I agree. If it's important enough, we make it happen. And it is never easy, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in our last few minutes together. Oh, Melissa, you got a string there that I just completely agree with. As we step towards personal Sabbath keeping, that's a big part of this. Are we giving our space, like we can talk about school systems, but are we giving ourselves permission to trust God? Yes, Sarah, laundry, groceries. Just looking at a few of these. Jeanette, I love that. as a parent, every once in a while, I felt mildly guilty, and my wife would shudder when I do the same thing for my students as a parent. It's like, yeah, we're actually, if that's going to end up being late, no problem, but we're not working on that this weekend. Oh, yes, Sue, that daily ritual of free play or genius hour or whatever it might be as a way there. And Becky, thank you. That idea of starting morning with a written prayer, a liturgy of a couple minutes of silence and breath. Great ideas. That's what I always love about this is I can come up with ideas and we'll slide into personal Sabbath keeping now. But I think it's important that you really, as a school, probably, like if you have someone else in this session and you recognize their name, that's your Sabbath collective. One of the things we'll get to is how I do Sabbath accountability. And I'll share that with you and invite you into that conversation as well. But I do believe that personal Sabbath is based on communal accountability and joy. We need to work towards joy and anticipation. If we're doing Sabbath well, we should start anticipating it and looking forward to it. So I'm going to invite you into some personal reflection about your own Sabbath practices now, and then I'll share with you a few things that I've done on what I'll call the roller coaster of Sabbath, because it's not a straight line in implementation. But I encourage you to think about, how do you meet God? Where do you see God present in your life, in your history, today? One of the things that we need to be thinking about as we think about Sabbath is its ability for us to connect with God and God's design for our life. And one of the rich traditions, Hebrew traditions around Sabbath, is the meal. And what does it look like to prepare a meal as an act of worship? For me, it's quality ingredients. It's good people. It's doing it collectively and celebrating God's goodness around a table. And then also thinking about, how do you rest? And a lot of how we rest comes from our heart and how we're entering this. I talk often. I live on a small postage stamp-sized suburban lot, and we eat probably 50 to 70% of our vegetables come off that postage stamp lot. And the reason that happens is because for me, gardening is my Sabbath rest. Spending time getting my hands dirty, celebrating the gift of new life and growth, harvesting because of a created God who said, on this part of the world, we can grow lettuce almost all year long. And for me, that's rest. Now, if you ask my wife, she looks at that and she rolls her eyes, because that is not rest for her. So it's important to be thinking about, how do we get rejuvenated and how do we encounter God? And I thank God and I'm grateful as I get my hands dirty and harvest carrots that you've grown with your own hand. And then I invite you into collective Sabbath and this idea of a Sabbath collective. How do I invite others into a good Sabbath story? So here's a few practical things that I encourage you to be a part of. Because it's important. We can talk about reflection, but we also need to talk about action. And I'd like you to think, before we go down this list, as we get close to the end here, which of these are you willing to do and actually seek someone out to be your accountability partner? So again, I love the idea of daily, weekly, monthly. My wife and I are suddenly empty nesters. As our two adult children or semi-adult children are off at university. And part of our daily Sabbath is we're both doing a Bible study. And we're in different groups, but it's the same Bible study, so every day after supper, we do our Bible study questions together. That's our daily Sabbath ritual. I am very particular about 24 hours disconnected as much as possible, but I know full well because of my job that Sunday afternoons cannot be part of my Sabbath. And we'll talk about why. And then also, I try to set aside a weekend a month where from Friday evening to Sunday evening, I'm not doing any work. As far as my job, my occupation is Director of Learning. There's obviously lawns to mow and leaves to rake. But I also think it's important that we have an accountability partner to our Sabbath rest. One of the mistakes I made, I'll call it mistakes, when the pandemic launched on Twitter, I did a pandemic thought of the day, and someone said to me, you should do a thought of the day every work day for the duration of the pandemic. And I said to myself, yeah, that's a good idea. Thinking full well that this thing would be over in 3 months. And I'm still at it today on Twitter. My handle's there. And you'll find a pattern on Fridays will be a tweet about Sabbath. And I invite people to actually say, this is when my 24 hours is going to start. Just as a soft accountability, a soft reminder. And it's the day I get teased because people will send me a message on Twitter and say, hey, you've used this thought of the day before. And my response usually is because you're not listening, as we all need practice with that. I encourage you to focus on gratitude, focus on food in that 24-hour period. And then think of, am I involved in collective worship, which has been a challenge during the pandemic? Am I seeking God's pleasure? What pleasure does God see in me? And am I embracing joy in all that I have? But I do also want to encourage you, if you do decide to deeply embrace Sabbath, to notice when the pacing starts. Notice when your body starts getting antsy. Because it will get antsy. There will be times in Sabbath, especially as you're getting used to it, where the sitting still will get uncomfortable. And in those moments, notice that, name that. I have a wife who will say, Darren, you're pacing. And I won't even have realized I'm pacing on a Sunday afternoon because I was uncomfortable with just the sitting, being, reading, because there's so much work that's coming on Monday. And just be able to work on that part of your life. A few final practical comments. There's a difference between silent and vibrate when it comes to your phone. It is virtually impossible to deeply live into Sabbath if your phone's on vibrate or on. Are you turning off the notifications? How are you managing your device in order to protect Sabbath? If you don't manage your device manages you. And I want to encourage each of you to an automatic out of office. This is my new automatic out of office that comes up every week. I'm not responding to emails at this time. It is my practice to enjoy 24 hours each weekend focused on rest and worship. I'll return to my email when our Sabbath is over at 5 p.m. on Sunday evening. And there, in that moment, if someone's going to send me an email from Saturday afternoon to Sunday evening, they're getting that response. And I'm inviting them into a better story as well. Because it's important to realize that Sabbath is an act of dependence. We are not, this is Walter Brueggemann speaking now, we are not as important as we think we are. Sabbath is a time to embrace this reality, to let it sink in, to own it, and to celebrate it. To celebrate our weakness and mortality, and celebrate our God of strength. Rest in the reality that there is a God and that you are not him. Thank you.